Imagine walking into a palace chamber and finding the queen consort accused of hiding the late queen's jewels. That's not a scene from a novel. It's the dramatic reality Princess Anne set in motion when she arrived at Clarence's house with a leather-bound binder that would shake the monarchy's foundations. From the moment she placed it on the polished table under the cold glare of the chandelier, the air changed. Those gilded walls had witnessed coronations and state dinners, but never a confrontation this personal, this dangerous. Friends, picture the hush in that corridor. Every aide holding their breath, waiting for the echo of Anne's voice to break the silence. I can tell you, the thought of a princess standing up to the queen consort herself still sends a chill down my spine, because what Anne carried wasn't just paperwork. It was evidence, photographs, and sworn statements pointing to treasures that were never supposed to leave the royal collection. For a brief moment, the monarchy's carefully built image trembled. A media monitor that week even showed a sudden spike in chatter about missing royal jewels. Proof that whispers were already escaping into the world beyond those palace gates. And in that instant, the question was no longer about heirlooms. It was about loyalty, betrayal, and whether centuries of royal tradition could be undone by one hidden vault. If you've ever wondered how deep family feuds can cut when crowns and history are on the line, stay with me, because by the end of this story, we'll see not just who controls the jewels, but who truly guards the legacy of Queen Elizabeth herself. Stay until the end. You won't believe how far this clash goes. To understand why Princess Anne's confrontation with Camilla was so explosive, we have to step back to the days immediately following Queen Elizabeth II's passing. The atmosphere around Buckingham Palace was a strange mix of grief and order. Behind the black-draped doors, archivists, courtiers, and security teams began the painstaking process of inventorying the royal collection. Every tiara, brooch, and necklace had to be accounted for. This wasn't just routine housekeeping. It was an unbroken tradition. Heirlooms of the late monarch were never meant to vanish because they represented the very continuity of the crown. Now, picture that world for a moment. The long, sterile tables in the palace's private archive room, lined with velvet trays and meticulous ledgers. Each jewel had its place, each brooch its reference number. A simple clerical error was almost impossible. Every movement was logged, double-checked, and cross-signed. Yet in the fog of mourning, discrepancies began to appear. Items that should have been there. The emerald choker, the sapphire brooch once pinned on Elizabeth during a Commonwealth summit, and even a pearl tiara worn at diplomatic banquets, were missing. Let me be straight with you. When I first read about those missing pieces, my gut reaction was disbelief. It felt absurd that such tightly guarded heirlooms could just disappear. But the precedent here matters. In the 19th century, after Queen Victoria's death, her private jewelry was catalogued with military precision to ensure nothing strayed into the wrong hands. That precedent was sacred, and Anne knew it better than anyone. As archivists scrambled for explanations, excuses were whispered. Perhaps clerical mix-ups, perhaps confusion in the chaos of transition. But Anne had heard enough palace rumors over her lifetime to know that whispers often mask something far darker. Staff members hinted that certain items had been handled by Camilla during private receptions, where no official record was kept. That was more than an administrative blunder. It was a potential breach of trust. And here lies the crucial contrast. Anne, the eternal soldier princess, valued tradition and duty above all else. She had spent her life carrying out hundreds of engagements each year, often without fanfare, because to her service wasn't optional. Camilla, on the other hand, had risen from decades of scandal to become queen consort, determined to cement her image with symbols of permanence, even if those symbols had belonged to the late queen. This clash of values, service versus self-preservation, was becoming unavoidable. Through the eyes of a palace archivist, the tension was unmistakable. Imagine their hands trembling as they checked off items on the inventory sheet, realizing entire lines had to be marked missing. They could sense the storm brewing, though they dared not speak aloud. For Anne, every missing jewel wasn't just a gap in the record. It was a piece of her mother's reign stolen and perhaps repurposed. By the time the first rumors trickled beyond the palace gates, Windsor Castle itself felt unsettled. Even the stone walls seemed to carry the weight of history about to crack. In hushed corners, aides spoke of Anne's growing determination to investigate quietly, while Camilla's allies dismissed the matter as overblown. The palace was still draped in mourning black, yet beneath the surface a new conflict was taking root. And so the stage was set, Anne's suspicion deepening, Camilla's shadow looming, and a monarchy on the brink of a scandal that could unravel its carefully polished image. The foundation was cracking, and everyone inside the palace knew it. The first real signs that something was deeply wrong came not from Buckingham Palace, but from whispers tied to a secluded estate in Wiltshire. Ray Mill House, Camilla's longtime private retreat, was never meant to be the center of a royal scandal. Yet suddenly, it was at the heart of rumors about missing heirlooms. For months, quiet conversations among staff hinted that pieces once belonging to Queen Elizabeth had been seen there off the official record, locked away in a private vault. Close your eyes and picture it. A modest country estate surrounded by high hedges, the night air lit by a single security lamp casting long shadows on the gravel driveway. Inside, cameras watched every entrance, but the true secret lay beneath the floorboards. One former aide, who had served Camilla during the pre-coronation period, confessed that they had witnessed unusual crates being delivered discreetly, labeled in ways that did not match standard royal collection codes. That admission was the spark Anne needed. From my perspective, this was the turning point. Until then, everything could have been chalked up to clerical mistakes. But once a credible insider admitted that an entire emerald choker had disappeared from the official inventory and later reappeared at Ray Mill House, it became more than whispers. It became a hidden narrative of power. And I'll be honest, when I learned of that aide's statement, I felt the hairs on my neck rise, because if it were true, this wasn't just sloppiness. It was intentional. Polls at the time quietly reflected a shift in public sentiment. A national survey suggested that trust in the monarchy had dipped by several points, with younger generations especially skeptical about transparency inside the royal household. That may sound small, but in a centuries-old institution built entirely on perception and trust, even a slight wobble can become a political earthquake. Anne moved carefully. She didn't rush to confront anyone. Instead, she summoned two trusted members of the Royal Protection Command and instructed them to treat the matter as a covert operation. Their task: verify whether a vault existed at Ray Mill House, and if so, what it contained. Under the guise of a security review, they gained limited access. What they discovered confirmed the aide's testimony: an underground chamber with restricted entry and erased logs. Its walls were lined with cabinets holding artifacts that should never have left Windsor or Buckingham. Imagine the scene. The beam of a flashlight cutting across velvet boxes stacked against stone walls. The dull gleam of a sapphire brooch caught by accident as one officer shifted a crate. This wasn't rumor anymore. The vault was real, and its contents matched the descriptions of items gone missing from the official lists. Anne reviewed the photographs with controlled fury. Among the images was the emerald and diamond choker Elizabeth had once described as a symbol of balance between heritage and restraint. Now it lay stripped of context, stuffed in a vault as if it were a private trinket. That visual alone made clear what was at stake. Not just the jewels themselves, but the meaning woven into them by decades of history. I can't help but reflect here. This was the moment when Anne knew she could no longer stand by. She had grown up watching her mother treat each heirloom as a vessel of duty, not vanity. To see those same objects misfiled, hidden, or even flaunted, without the weight of their history, must have felt like betrayal. And betrayal doesn't stay secret for long. The more Anne looked into the matter, the clearer it became that Camilla's inner circle had tried to spin the narrative as a simple clerical mix-up. But the presence of erased digital logs, mislabeling, and testimonies from former staff painted a different story. If anything, it suggested deliberate concealment. Publicly, nothing had erupted yet, but inside Clarence House and Windsor, tension was tightening like a coiled spring. Aides began avoiding eye contact when Anne's name came up. Camilla's allies doubled down, preparing talking points about confusion during the transition after the Queen's death, while the archivists, those silent guardians of royal history, continued to mark missing beside entries they knew should never have been missing at all. By this point, the atmosphere within the royal family was unmistakable. Something was going to snap. The private discovery of that vault set the stage for a confrontation no one could stop. The only question left was how and when the truth would break into the open. While the public carried on unaware, the palace's inner circle was vibrating with a tension that could no longer be ignored. Princess Anne had the photographs, the signed statements, the erased logs, all the makings of a case that could devastate the monarchy if it ever slipped into the public sphere. But Anne was no novice to royal politics. Instead of storming through the front gates of Buckingham, she chose the subtler path: quiet meetings, whispered questions, and carefully staged maneuvers drawn from her decades of experience navigating the crown's labyrinthine corridors. Imagine her in her study late at night, the only light coming from a brass desk lamp, a sealed letter from her mother resting on one side, and the incriminating binder on the other. Outside her window, London's fog pressed against the glass, heavy with secrets. That was the setting where Anne plotted her course, not with rash declarations, but with the cool, deliberate patience of a woman who understood the power of timing. She summoned a handful of confidants, aides whose loyalty stretched back years. Their task was not to spread rumors, but to ensure that if Anne moved forward, she would not be dismissed as paranoid. Facts must speak louder than sentiment, she told them. With that directive, they began to comb through the archives once more, double-checking inventories, comparing handwriting on old ledgers, even matching faded ink to dates when certain jewels had last been worn in public. It was meticulous, exhausting work, but it revealed a consistent pattern. Items most associated with Elizabeth's symbolism had vanished after private events hosted by Camilla. Here's the human angle I find most striking. Even staff who had once admired Camilla for weathering decades of public scrutiny began to doubt her judgment. In quiet exchanges over tea, chambermaids whispered about brooches seen glittering in rooms where they shouldn't have been. A valet recalled helping pack a case of jewels for private safekeeping, only to be told later that nothing of the sort had happened. Each story was a thread, and Anne was weaving them into a tapestry of evidence. But Anne wasn't the only one at work. Behind the velvet curtains of Clarence House, Camilla was busy reshaping the narrative. She painted Anne as stubborn, unwilling to accept change, and clinging to a bygone era. At dinners with senior courtiers, she dropped casual remarks about Anne's aggression, suggesting her sister-in-law was unstable. And in the king's private chambers, she leaned heavily on emotion, reminding Charles of her years of loyalty and insisting that allowing Anne to escalate would plunge the monarchy into a scandal from which it might not recover. This battle was as much about perception as possession, and perception is where the press began to stir. A single article appeared on a minor blog hinting at a jewel dispute inside the palace. It was quickly taken down, but not before screenshots began circulating among royal watchers online. For a brief moment, hashtags flickered into life, though the mainstream press stayed silent. That was enough for Anne to realize that if she didn't act soon, the story would break without her framing it. Prince William added another dimension to this unfolding drama. In a discreet note delivered by his private secretary, Prince William warned Anne to be cautious. He agreed with her instincts but urged her to weigh the consequences of going too far. "The conflict has grown," his note read, "and you know the stakes." His words underscored what Anne already knew. This wasn't just about jewels. It was about who would define the monarchy in the years after Elizabeth. Tradition or reinvention. I'll be candid here. As I pieced this together, I felt the enormity of what was unfolding. It wasn't a mere squabble over heirlooms. It was a struggle for the crown's very soul, fought in hushed rooms and through veiled threats. The eerie part was that the public still had no idea how close their monarchy was to implosion. If you're still following along, this is where I need to pause for a moment. Stories like this, rooted in whispered evidence, sealed letters, and rivalries that span generations, rarely reach the public eye in their full form. If you want to keep uncovering these hidden layers of royal drama, make sure you stay with us because the deeper we go, the more shocking the truths become, and you won't want to miss what comes next. Now, back to Anne. Her strategy culminated in a private review session with two senior advisors, both of whom had lived through Elizabeth's reign and remembered its unyielding emphasis on continuity. She laid out her binder page by page, photograph by photograph. The room was silent save for the soft turning of paper. One advisor finally exhaled and admitted, "If this becomes public, it will dwarf every scandal of the last decade." That was the confirmation Anne needed. She wasn't imagining threats, she was facing them. And though she longed to confront Camilla openly, she knew the blow-up had to be staged with care. It couldn't happen in shadows forever. To preserve her mother's memory, Anne would eventually have to drag this conflict into the light. The palace halls remained eerily quiet. Yet every look, every whispered aside carried weight. Staff avoided naming the jewels aloud, referring instead to the missing items. Camilla's allies dismissed the binder as theatrics, but they were shaken by Anne's resolve. The queen consort herself pretended composure at public appearances, her smile perfectly rehearsed, though her eyes betrayed the tension. And in the midst of it all, Anne returned to her mother's sealed letter. Each time she read it, her resolve hardened. Elizabeth had warned of heirlooms being misused, had pointed directly to the next generation as rightful stewards. With that letter in hand, Anne knew the confrontation was inevitable. The only question was whether it would destroy the monarchy or save it. The stage was set for a blow-up the public could no longer be shielded from. The moment could no longer be delayed. What had once been whispers and secret files now erupted into a spectacle inside Clarence House. Picture the grand drawing room, its gilded frames catching the afternoon sun, a space once reserved for receptions and soft laughter. On this day, however, it felt like a courtroom. Princess Anne entered the grand drawing room with two senior aides flanking her, the binder gripped in her hands like a weapon. Across the room, Queen Consort Camilla stood waiting, startled but resolute, masking her unease behind a veneer of calm. The silence broke like glass. Anne's voice rang out sharp and unwavering, echoing off the portraits of monarchs who had ruled before them. Her accusations were precise. Heirlooms removed, records falsified, treasures hidden away in a private vault. The emerald and diamond choker, the Victorian sapphire brooch, the pearl tiara, all documented, photographed, and out of place. Camilla's composure flickered. Her fingers twitched. Her smile faltered. She countered with the same rehearsed defense. Clerical errors, confusion after the Queen's death, innocent misplacement. But Anne pressed on. She unveiled testimonies, photographs, and wiped ledgers, each piece of evidence dismantling Camilla's denials. What unfolded wasn't a mere family argument. It was the reckoning everyone inside those walls had feared. And beyond them, the fallout spread fast. Within hours, whispers of a confrontation at Clarence House reached the press. The hashtag #return. The jewels ignited across social media, speculation soaring, searches spiking worldwide. The monarchy was once again at the heart of a cultural storm, and then Camilla made her move. She stormed from the drawing room straight to the king, her words painted in grievance and betrayal. Anne, she claimed, had staged an ambush, driven by jealousy, bent on dividing the family and shaming the crown. The binder, she insisted, was fiction spun by disloyal staff. Charles listened, torn between two loyalties: his steadfast sister, guardian of tradition and truth, and his wife, the woman who had stood beside him through decades of controversy. Courtiers watched as Camilla urged him to act, to strip Anne of her ceremonial duties, including her revered place in the Order of the Garter. For the monarchy, the line between loyalty and survival had never felt thinner. Such a decree would have struck Anne at her core, a public wound meant to silence her within the monarchy itself. But before the order could take shape, the story escaped the palace walls. Within hours, tabloids splashed headlines about a palace confrontation, while international outlets speculated about missing heirlooms and royal betrayal. Buckingham Palace's official response, a brief statement citing internal family matters, did little to calm the storm. In fact, its silence screamed louder than any denial. The public drew its own conclusions. Anne, the principled defender of legacy. Camilla, the usurper clinging to borrowed power. This was the true climax, the moment the quiet war turned into public scandal. For centuries, the monarchy had survived by mastering discretion, letting silence smooth over fractures. But in the age of hashtags and 24-hour news, silence only deepened suspicion. Anne, however, did not flinch. The morning after the confrontation, she appeared at a veteran's memorial, composed, solemn, resolute. She said nothing about jewels or confrontation, speaking instead of honor and duty. The subtext was unmistakable. While Camilla scrambled behind palace doors to contain the fallout, Anne embodied the old virtues: integrity, service, restraint. Cameras captured her standing tall, the Union Jack fluttering behind her. The image became symbolic, the steadfast sister against the trembling crown. The divide was now irreparable, the binder of evidence on one side, the queen consort's desperate defense on the other. Those present at Clarence House would later recall the stillness of that room, the weight of Camilla's silence as Anne's accusations echoed through the gilded air. It was a moment that carved itself into royal history. And yet, the confrontation's true impact began only after Anne left the room. Within 24 hours, the scandal had crossed continents. Front pages blazed with headlines: missing heirlooms, queen consort accused, palace rift deepens. Crowds gathered outside Windsor Castle, murmuring theories and waving signs. One banner read, "The jewels belong to history, not politics." For the first time since Elizabeth's death, the monarchy's image of unshakable stability was splintering. The story was no longer just royal gossip. It was international. The New York Times dissected the crown crisis. Le Monde analyzed Anne's unyielding sense of duty. Australian morning shows debated whether Camilla's reputation could ever recover. What began as whispers in gilded corridors had become a global reckoning, one that questioned not just the jewels, but the monarchy's very soul. It struck me then that the jewels, glittering, exquisite, timeless, had ceased to be ornaments. They had become symbols of something far larger: trust, loyalty, and the moral spine of the monarchy itself. Inside the palace, fallout gave way to paralysis. Advisors were split. Some urged Charles to end the speculation with a decisive statement in Camilla's defense. Others whispered that distancing the crown from the queen consort was the only way to preserve its integrity. The divide chilled the air in every corridor. Courtiers who once exchanged polite greetings now passed each other in wary silence, uncertain where allegiances lay. Beyond the gates, public sentiment was shifting at a speed no royal machinery could control. Polls showed Camilla's favorability plummeting, her name now synonymous with entitlement and deceit. By contrast, Anne's quiet dignity at the Veterans Memorial became a defining image of restraint. She said nothing, yet the nation heard her loud and clear. In her, people saw the ghost of Elizabeth: duty, sacrifice, and integrity reborn in her daughter. Historians and legal experts joined the fray. Commentators revisited Queen Victoria's own jewelry ledgers, records so precise they had once prevented similar disputes. Constitutional scholars reminded audiences that royal heirlooms tied to the crown were not private possessions, but national trust. The jewels were never Camilla's to keep, one expert declared on live television. But the issue was never purely legal, it was moral. And in that moral court, the monarchy was losing. For ordinary Britons, the sense of betrayal cut deep. If they can't even protect their own treasures, how can we trust them with ours? A caller asked during a BBC radio segment. A question echoed across social media, where hashtags demanding accountability refused to fade. At the heart of it all stood Charles, caught between love and legacy. His wife, humiliated and under siege, begged for protection. His sister, steadfast and unyielding, held the evidence that could destroy or redeem them all. Every day he hesitated. The silence grew louder and more costly. For Anne, victory came laced with sorrow. She had exposed the truth and safeguarded her mother's legacy, but at a terrible price. The monarchy's credibility had fractured, not from an external attack, but from within. The trust that once bound the House of Windsor had been shattered, perhaps irreparably. And that, I suppose, is the tragedy at the core of it all. A family chosen to guard history, now accused of stealing from it. Once the jewels were hidden, once the photographs taken, once the confrontation leaked, there was no turning back. The glitter had faded. What remained was the one thing no crown could restore: trust. The palace could stage smiles. They could arrange photo calls and release carefully worded statements. But behind every headline and every polite exchange, one question lingered. Could the monarchy ever be whole again? That question led, inevitably, to Balmoral. The castle, long a refuge of royal peace, became instead the site of an uneasy truce. Behind its granite walls, Princess Anne and Queen Consort Camilla met once more. Two women bound by duty, divided by belief. Camilla, worn down by weeks of scrutiny, agreed to return the heirlooms to the royal collection. The emerald choker, the sapphire brooch, the pearl tiara, each piece quietly placed back under official lock and key. On paper, the conflict was resolved, but those who knew the monarchy understood what had truly been lost. The jewels were home. Trust was not. Anne left Balmoral with her head held high and her mother's sealed letter still in her keeping. That letter, long whispered about, was more than a list of instructions. It hinted at something deeper, a hidden intention, perhaps even a warning. Some believed it named a future custodian for Elizabeth's most symbolic treasures, perhaps Princess Charlotte herself. Others suspected it contained a stark admonition about power, legacy, and how easily both can be corrupted when symbols are treated as possessions. The truth remains sealed within that envelope, and Anne alone holds the key. To the public, Balmoral marked a bittersweet ending. Camilla kept her title, but her reputation lay in ruins. Anne emerged a quiet victor, the embodiment of integrity, a reminder that service, not status, defines the monarchy's worth. Yet beneath the surface, the questions only deepened. If one sealed letter could change everything, what else might lie hidden in the royal archives, waiting to rewrite the story of the crown itself? And that brings us to you. What do you believe the